Have you ever felt like you learned to take care of yourself before you were ready? Like no one really taught you how to be independent, you just became that way because you had to. You didn't cry loudly, you didn't demand attention, you didn't make scenes. Instead, you became quiet, the child who stayed in their room, the child who didn't ask for help, the child who learned very early that needing people didn't always work. And now, as an adult, you're independent. You handle things alone. You rarely rely on anyone. People admire you for it. They say you're strong. They say you're mature. They say you're emotionally stable. But what they don't see is that your independence wasn't always a choice. Sometimes it was survival. And if this resonates with you, there's a good chance you were once the quiet child. The quiet child doesn't always look unhappy. In fact, they often look calm. They sit quietly during family gatherings. They play alone without complaining. They don't interrupt conversations. They don't demand attention. To adults, this looks like a good child, easy to raise, well-behaved, mature for their age. But what many don't realize is that quiet doesn't always mean content. Sometimes quiet means unheard, because when a child learns that their emotions aren't noticed, they slowly stop expressing them, not because they don't feel deeply, but because they don't believe anyone is listening. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. The quiet child starts observing more and speaking less. They begin studying the emotional environment around them. They become sensitive to tone, to tension, to silence. They learn when it's safe to speak and when it's safer to stay quiet. And this awareness becomes part of who they are. At first, it seems like maturity, but underneath, it's often loneliness. Maybe you were the child who learned to calm themselves down. When you were upset, you didn't always run to someone. You sat quietly. You distracted yourself. You waited for the feeling to pass. No one taught you this. You just figured it out. And slowly, you became your own emotional support. You learned to regulate yourself without external comfort. You became emotionally self-contained. And while that can become a strength, it also shapes how you relate to people later in life. Because when you grow up learning that comfort comes from within, you may struggle to seek it from others, even when you need it, even when you're overwhelmed, even when you're hurting. Another thing that often happens is that the quiet child becomes highly independent in practical ways too. You may have learned to solve problems alone, to figure things out without asking, to manage responsibilities quietly. Maybe you became the child who didn't need reminders, the child who didn't cause stress, the child who handled things. And over time, this independence became part of your identity. You were the reliable one, the mature one, the strong one. But sometimes that strength formed because you felt like you had to grow up early. Because when emotional support is limited, children often become emotionally older than their age. They learn to manage feelings that feel too big without guidance, and that can create a deep internal strength, but also a quiet emotional distance. As the quiet child grows, they often become the independent teenager. They don't ask for much, they handle school responsibilities alone, they keep their struggles private. Teachers may describe them as responsible, parents may describe them as easy. But inside, they may feel invisible. Because when you're the quiet one, your struggles are easy to miss. You don't act out, you don't demand attention, you don't make noise. So people assume you're okay, even when you're not, even when you're overwhelmed, even when you're lonely, even when you're struggling internally. And over time, you learn something powerful and painful. If you don't expect support, you won't be disappointed. So you lower expectations. You become self-sufficient. You stop needing too much. And slowly, independence becomes your identity. But here's something else that often develops. The quiet child becomes deeply empathetic because when you spend years observing instead of speaking, you become highly aware of others. You notice small changes in mood, you sense emotional tension, you feel when something is off, even when no one says anything. You become emotionally intelligent. You learn to understand others deeply. But at the same time, you may struggle to prioritize yourself because growing up, you learn to adjust, to accommodate, to not take up too much space. So as an adult, you may continue putting others first. You listen, you support, you understand. But sometimes you don't always feel understood in return. And that can create a quiet kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being emotionally present for others, while quietly holding your own feelings inside. As an adult, your independence becomes even more visible. You're the one who handles everything. You solve problems on your own. You carry emotional burdens quietly. You rarely ask for help. People admire this about you. They see someone capable, stable, strong. But they don't always see the cost, because emotional independence, when formed too early, can make closeness difficult. Not because you don't want connection, but because relying on others feels unfamiliar, sometimes even uncomfortable. You may hesitate to open up. You may minimize your own struggles. You may feel safer handling everything alone because that's what you learned, because that's what felt safe, because that's what you've always done. Another trait many quiet children carry into adulthood is resilience. You've handled things alone for so long that you're incredibly strong. You adapt quickly. You manage stress internally. You keep moving forward. But resilience built in isolation can make vulnerability harder because strength becomes your comfort zone. You feel safer being the strong one than the one who needs help. So you keep going. You keep carrying things. You keep holding everything together, even when you're tired, even when you're overwhelmed, even when you quietly wish someone would notice. The quiet child often becomes the adult who says, "I'm fine," even when they're not, because you've spent years minimizing your emotions, convincing yourself you can handle things, telling yourself it's not a big deal. And over time, this becomes automatic. You don't always recognize your own emotional needs. You just keep moving forward, quietly. But here's something important. Being emotionally independent is not a flaw. It's a strength. You developed resilience, self-awareness, emotional depth. You learned to navigate life internally. You became strong in ways many people never do. But healing begins when independence becomes a choice, not a necessity. When you realize that needing others doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The quiet child doesn't need to stop being independent, but they can learn to also accept support, to open up slowly, to share emotions safely, to allow closeness. Because true strength isn't just handling everything alone, it's knowing when to let someone in. It's allowing yourself to be seen, to be heard, to be supported, even if that feels unfamiliar at first. If you were the quiet child, there's a good chance you're still carrying that independence today, and maybe it's helped you survive. But now you don't have to survive alone. You can still be strong and also be supported. You can still be independent and also be connected. You can still be quiet and also be heard. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not losing your independence, but learning that you don't always have to carry everything by yourself. If this video resonated with you, there's a good chance you're on a quiet healing journey, and you're not alone. There are many people who grew up quietly and are now learning to live more openly. And if you're one of them, this channel is for you. The Restored Child is about understanding the past, healing quietly, and becoming whole, one step at a time. So if you connected with this message, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because here we talk about emotional healing, childhood patterns, and the quiet experiences that shape who we become. And if this video helped you understand yourself a little more, leave a like. It helps this message reach others who may also have been the quiet child. And sometimes, just knowing you're not alone can be the beginning of healing. Thank you for being here. And remember, the quiet child didn't disappear. They grew up, and now they're learning to be heard.